Hey guys, it's Ryan. It's Monday morning. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to be at school today. Something came up, and I need to take care of my girls today, my kids. So what I did is I'm going to post today's lecture on Classroom, and I'm also going to give you guys this video recording with some explanation, which I think will be a little more helpful than just the slides alone, just my explanations. So consider this kind of the adapted version of our guided notes today. So we're looking at our last conflict, the war in Afghanistan. The big thing we're doing is we're looking at the causes and the effects. So if you go to your guided notes, the very last thing we're going to do, like the check that we are going to do is, let's wait for this to load. We're going to identify like what caused this conflict to occur and then what were the effects. So on page 4 of your notes, you'll see these two columns right here. Kind of have that in the back of your mind throughout this whole day. If you come across something that might have caused this, flip to that back page and write it down real quick. And then the effects are like the outcomes, like what are the how are people affected? So here we go. Here's Afghanistan. It's in the Middle East right here. The basics of like the country is it's a pretty large country, 32 million people, about the size of Texas in terms of land. The language is very diverse. So the national language is Afghan Persian, but there's lots of tribal languages. So over 70 different languages are spoken. It's like mixed ethnicity. Literacy rate is very low. For point of comparison, the United States is in the upper 90% of literacy rate. And in terms of geography, it's mountainous and desert. There's deserts in the south and mountains in the north. And a big spine of mountains runs across the whole country, kind of like diagonally. And then it's landlocked, so there's no access to the sea. Let me make this bigger. So this is a really cool, whoops. This is a really cool, um, that's so interesting. It's different. Anyway, this is a visual of the terrain. As you can see, it's super mountainous. This mountain range that runs through, it's called the Hindu Kush. Really rugged, um, really remote, really dry. Um, oh, interesting. The slides are kind of like go behind each other. This is what I was looking at. So you can see there's like a river valley here, really high mountains that have snow. And basically, like, this is what you got to know about Afghan history. It's like a super unique country. It's been conquered by all these other empires in the past, and they've had a really tumultuous history. So they gained independence 100 years ago from Great Britain. Then they had a civil war internally. Then the Soviet Union invaded. So the Soviet Union was there from like 1979 to 89. Um, and basically, they fought off the Soviet Union for 10 years. And ironically, now that we're fighting there, we actually funded a lot of that war with the U.S. aid. Um, so then, following that Soviet invasion in 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed, so they retreated. There's this really long civil war that you can see, and the Taliban wins and takes power. So here's a big thing, guys. The Taliban, there's a misconception that people perceive the Taliban to be a terrorist group. The Taliban is actually like a rebel group that's like running the government. Um, so like I can't think of a good analogy, but it's almost like if a non-governmental group like came to power in the United States and like took over the government. That's basically what happened. Um, so like I'm trying to think of an example. Like think about like a cartel, like a narco cartel. Like imagine if they had enough power to like literally run the government, like they're operating the government in DC. That's kind of what's happening here. So the Taliban government's in power. They're super harsh and repressive. They have they're radical Muslims, and basically they fund a lot of their government through the drug trade. So they grow heroin, um, but not much of that money is shared with the people. So there's this kind of paradoxical situation where there's like millions of dollars being made every day on heroin, but people are starving and there's famine. These are a few images of the the war with the Soviet Union in the 80s. And this is kind of a jokey slide about like how we're like literally giving the Afghans weapons to fight off the Soviets for two reasons, right? We don't want them to become communists, and we want them to support and have their own government. So we're trying to help them kind of win their independence by giving them all these weapons and things like this. And this is another really cool picture of the terrain and the Soviets leaving. And then when the Soviets leave, like we said, the Taliban takes control. So like we said, they're repressive. This is like they're violent. It's like pretty nasty. There's public executions. They're destroying like historical and religious sites, like antiquities, I guess you might say, like things that like the world agrees like are sacred. They're like destroying if it's not in line with their religion and ideology. This is where heroin comes from. It's crazy. It's this poppy plant, this flower. It oozes this sap. Um, the country's like simple. You can see that this is a home. This is like it's like a dirt floor with a rug on it. It's very simple. And this is kind of like where most Americans kind of start to pay attention. So September 11th happens, and this isn't the first incident. Um, Unfortunately, we're going to see that later in some of the videos. But basically, as you all know, the Pentagon was bombed, and the Twin Towers. The code name for this operation is Operation Enduring Freedom. And basically, these attackers were motivated and funded through Al Qaeda and the Taliban. The two names that are going to come up are Bin Laden. He's the leader of Al Qaeda, and then Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the guy who is like kind of the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. And basically, days after this, there's this. You're going to see this word again: a coalition response. There's a U.S.-led coalition response where the U.S. and their allies, our allies, mobilize. And days after September 11th, we respond. So what happens in the days after the attack is that Al Qaeda, which is the terrorist group that is being funded and supported through the Taliban government, if that makes sense, claims responsibility for this attack. And the Taliban government in Afghanistan allows Al Qaeda to hide out in their country because they are allies. So this is Bin Laden, and this is a little more history about him. So he has this alliance with the Taliban. And basically what happens is that the Taliban government refuses to extradite or like turn him over. It's kind of like a fancy legal word for like someone did a crime in one country, but they're currently in a different one. It's like an agreement to send that person back to stand trial. And basically the Taliban government refuses and they hide him. Here's a quick overview of Africa and Asia to show you kind of like the extent of the Al Qaeda network. It's not just an Afghan network. It flows throughout the Middle East, and then this is an interesting. I almost put these two side by side, but you can kind of see how the U.S. government, the U.S. military influence, like kind of aligns with the Al Qaeda territory, and you can see there's lots of places on the map that are red here, like North Africa right here, that are not red on this map. So there's like. Basically, the point of this is there's many territories that have no U.S. military control, and the government doesn't. Our government doesn't have any role over the Taliban operations. So anyway, in the days after 9/11, there's this big manhunt. Our country's reeling. It's the biggest attack on our soil, and people are just floored. And according to Bin Laden, there's all these misperceptions about like what motivated these attackers to do what they did. Basically, this is what Bin Laden says. He basically claims that it's not about like one common misconception is like Al Qaeda kind of hates our freedoms and our way of life, but that's not actually true. He actually is more bent out of shape about our foreign policy towards Muslim countries, and the fact that we support Israel. That's like a whole nother story, and basically that we're supporting like we're supporting some countries in the Middle East that he kind of disagrees with that relationship. And finally, there's this occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, that there's troops in those two countries. This is kind of what I said earlier. It's not about religious differences or freedoms. We're going to skip over this, but basically, this is the mastermind. I mean, there's this 9/11 report that came out that was, kind of tell the whole story. Basically, we capture him pretty quickly, but Bin Laden's on the run. So basically, no one knows where he's at. So there's rumors he's in Pakistan, hiding in caves. He's it's incredibly tough for us to find. So this is kind of a jokey slide from the National Post about a Where's Waldo joke about where's Osama bin Laden. But basically, there's kind of this long manhunt for finding him. So basically, here's the U.S. response. Basically, we demand to the Taliban that they deliver, hand over the Al-Qaeda leaders to us, and to release all of our citizens that are in their jails, and to protect foreigners in Afghanistan, and basically to shut down all their terrorist activities, which is a pretty funny, it's a pretty bold demand. Basically, hey, terrorists, stop being terrorists and do the right thing. This would be the time in class where I ask you, does the Taliban accept this offer? And of course they do not. So fast forward a long time, the military tracks down and finally gets Osama bin Laden. But basically, it puts, again, this is a new problem that we haven't exactly encountered. It's a decision that the military has to make that's not a black and white decision. Do we attack a country that's harboring a bad guy? And is it justified to attack a country that is knowingly and willingly harboring someone? So here's a little more about Operation Enduring Freedom. The actions start earlier than October 7th, but this is when the first mission starts. And basically, this is it. 1, 2, 3. Capture bin Laden, destroy the network, and basically remove the Taliban from the government. And we're going to get to this in a few slides, but there's a lot of similarities to Vietnam. People aren't wearing military uniforms; they're wearing normal clothes, so we don't know who's a friend and who's an enemy. Also, at the time, the Taliban is getting money not only from heroin, but also from neighboring countries like Iran, who's generally an enemy of us. This is a little more about the landscape. It's super rugged. Taliban or Al-Qaeda fighters have a advantage because they know the terrain, they know the culture, they know the people. And what happens is soldiers go over there initially to fight, and the fighting, you'll see in the videos, dies down pretty quickly, and then it turns to this kind of humanitarian nation building mission. So that's kind of why I showed you this. There's lots of efforts from the military to hand out food and to support people. So basically, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is was this the right decision to attack? And why do you think us with the most powerful military in the world wasn't able to subdue the Taliban, similar to in Vietnam? We're the biggest, baddest military, and we can't beat the Viet Cong and the Taliban. So here's the similarities. Like Vietnam, it's a long conflict with no clear end in sight. Friend and enemy is unclear. It's not a popular war at home. It's not popular with other governments, and it's really not a feel-good war. It's not winning the hearts and minds. This is an expression your hearts is your emotions, and your mind is your logic. And basically, we're fighting against peasants that have nothing to lose, and it's their homeland. So it's a hard situation to win. So on your notes, I just gave you a big chunk of space, and what I asked you to do here is just take notes on what you think are the biggest problems. So you can review this. Let me see what needs explanation. IEDs is a common strategy used by the Taliban, which are basically these buried bombs that when you drive over them, they explode, or they can be detonated with a remote. So basically, imagine a military convoy is driving down the road, and then just someone hits a button on a cell phone, and there's a big explosion. Drug war grows, famine continues. There's like efforts at democracy, but their government's super corrupt, and it's like really, really bad. There's tons of civilian casualties. And then the Afghan troops are supporting the US troops, but they're largely untrained and under-equipped. So basically, it's like they're helping us, but it's not very helpful, basically. Also, successful or unsuccessful. So basically, there's a new government, but it's really unstable, and like I said, it's corrupt. It's not a very functional government. Like, as much as our government's kind of wild, it's functional, and in Afghanistan, it's largely not. And Even though the Taliban were kind of beaten back, they've kind of re-emerged, and as you can see, they've quadrupled in size, so they're 4 times as large. And now they've moved largely to areas that are a little less controlled by the U.S. military, like Southeast Afghanistan and Pakistan. And NATO, which is like kind of an international peacekeeping organization, it stands for North American Treaty Organization. They are losing control too. And I believe that's the end. So if you look at your guided notes at the bottom of page 3, there is a video that's packed with really good information that is called War in Afghanistan 17 Years Later. Then if you flip your page over, there's a longer video. You don't have to watch the whole thing. If you watch the first half, I think that's good. I really just want you to see not like it's on the ground interviews, and I just want you to see like what it's like for ordinary Afghans who are like fighting back against the Taliban. It's a cool perspective because it's not like a newscast and it's not like curated like that. It's just really raw and real. So take a look at that. And for that, the goal is just to write down like what notes that you see. And then I forgot to mention this at the top, but the very first thing I want you to do is just watch this short video. It's a quick newscast that just kind of is on the heels of 9/11, kind of explaining what's going on there. So I hope that this is everything you guys need to succeed today. When you're done, here's what you could do. There's basically catch up on anything you have missing. Check the checklists on Google Classroom and take the quizzes and try to be as caught up as possible. What we'll do tomorrow is we're going to pick the book and the conflict that you are going to investigate further. I hope you guys have a great day.